For week 4's reading, I chose to do my reading response on Negotiating a Space for Aboriginal Art by Leanne Martin, as well as Placing Art in the National Gallery of Canada. So this paper focuses on Indigenous art and exhibitions, and the paper talks about the set of rules that are followed when talking, or the lack of talk, around Aboriginal art in Canada's history. So the main point is that through history, your Indigenous historical objects have always been seen through a Eurocentric lens, and they have been neglected and haven't really been, thought about unless it follows through that strict European traditions. And the next point is more of a solution to this, where Indigenous people need to be given more opportunity to be hired professionally in these institutions and permanently, so that they're always in the conversation when it comes to Aboriginal and Indigenous arts and artifacts, so that they aren't misrepresented and aren't underrepresented as well. A quote from the reading: "Authentic meaning traditional, free and untouched from European influences." I thought that was interesting because the European focus is on cultural purity, and the artists that they would choose to represent the Canadian cultural purity would be people like the Group of Seven, where they create landscape paintings and drawings that show the land untouched by anybody, not even humans, barely any animals, just endless hills and valleys and whatnot. And I thought that was interesting because the creation of these paintings gathered lots of tourism and lots of travelers from Europe to come and see these untouched valleys, and these places are not just untouched, they belong to the Indigenous people. So all these tourists were coming in not really knowing about the other people living here, and they're just disrespecting the space. And it's kind of ironic because it goes 100% against this idea of purity when they're destroying the purity by visiting and disrupting the space. My second reading, Placing Aboriginal Art in the National Gallery of Canada by Whitelaw, focuses on the National Gallery of Canada and Aboriginal art that's being displayed. So the main points of this article is about the lack of representation and the negative impacts of exhibiting Aboriginal and Indigenous art through a European or Eurocentric lens. The second point is that exhibitions struggle to display Indigenous arts alongside Euro-Canadian arts because they essentialize the art as well as misrepresent it without knowing the full story of the objects that they are presenting. This article basically recaps and just closes off by saying that galleries are as time progresses, they're evolving to learn more and more on how to properly and respectfully present Indigenous arts, and they're on this long journey. Although they're not doing the greatest job, they are trying, and through integration and cooperation with the Indigenous people, they will continue to grow and learn and properly present these artifacts. A quote from the text: 1941, New York exhibition displayed Indigenous artifacts in a dramatic way with high contrast lighting to separate them from being seen as part of a continuing society. I thought that this quote was really interesting because I didn't realize the impact of just displaying something with bright lighting to make it seem more archaic, and maybe as well as displaying it in a traditional museum way, in a glass box, or not being displayed properly, how that it changes the meaning of the artifact. And I just thought it was how interesting it was that they could, you know, make it seem even more primitive as they wanted, as their goal was for displaying these Indigenous artifacts. All in all, these articles really opened my eyes to seeing how many steps were taken to make Aboriginal and Indigenous arts and artifacts seem less than compared to Eurocentric and European artifacts and artwork, and just how they purposely, you know, didn't care about, you know, finding the real meaning of these objects and just misrepresenting them, as well as just underrepresenting the Indigenous peoples and their work. You know, these articles have really, you know, opened my eyes, and now I'm seeing that, like, as well as the fact that they are trying their best in present day, but they could be trying a lot harder.